These little toys, right? You got to power them somehow. And it turns out there's batteries in everything, and they're critical to keeping things work. And it's a never-ending struggle sometimes to understand what kind of battery, how to maintain it, all that kind of stuff. It by itself can be an entire course, a university, graduate level kind of deal. But as an overview, you got to kind of set the stage or just understand what the terms are, what's going on, some of the high-level stuff. And we have Doug, stand up, come on up here, and you have the baton of authority there with the slide. There we go. He's going to talk about batteries.
I'm Doug W2VX, one of the Lost Boys from Never Never Land. I mentioned that I was doing some battery testing, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 months ago, and Greg said, would you do a presentation on batteries? And my first inclination was, it's a huge topic, and there are 100 experts in the club that know something about batteries and may think that they know everything about batteries. I am one of those. So I'm not going to try to present everything about all batteries. I'm not going to talk about batteries that you buy that are already encased in your radios, that are in consumer products, batteries that are in your cell phones, that kind of thing. Someone has already engineered a solution for that. And when something goes wrong with those batteries, you take your Apple phone over and you buy a new one. All right? That's kind of the way that it works. You want another one for your HT, you order one from the manufacturer and you put it on there, because all the engineering for using it, charging it, discharging it, knowing that it's the right thing, that it's safe to use, has already been taken care of. The problem becomes when you want a battery that's sort of general purpose. And I don't know about you guys, but when I grew up, there were lead acid batteries. There were deep cells, and there were, starter batteries, and that was pretty much it. Now there's a battery chemistry du jour, literally coming out every other month. There's something new. Okay, the first message in this whole thing is, the first thing that most people ask me is, what battery should I buy? And of course my response is, what are you going to do with the battery? There are no perfect batteries for all circumstances. You have to have a problem definition, you have to have a use definition for the batteries. And if you get a battery and you set it up so that it'll work as hard as it can to the limits that it's designed for, and you do that day after day, your battery is going to fail. You're going to put it through its paces. It seems like it should do the job for you, but that's really not how batteries work. Batteries have specifications, and you have to be kind to your battery and take good care of it. There's two basic kinds of batteries. There are primary batteries and secondary batteries. Secondary batteries are rechargeable. That's all we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about battery systems, because batteries don't stand alone. They require support equipment. You have to charge them. Obviously, they're going to discharge. You have to be able to know what the health of your battery is, and at some point you have to decide whether you need to retire your battery or do something in order to maintain it. There are many, many chemistries. I think when I counted from the Battery Bible, there were over 150 different commercial battery chemistries. And we're only going to talk about two. We're going to talk about lead and Lithium Iron Phosphate tonight, since those are the two that seem to be the most popular. We're going to do a little bit of a review of battery terms, and we're going to talk about charging and discharging. I want to talk about safety a little bit, because I've had an experience with lithium batteries where I accidentally shorted out a couple of lithium batteries, and they are fire starters. They will burn down your house or destroy your car. I was going to talk about the lifetime cost of batteries, but it's very complicated, and frankly, I don't think it really matters, because the cost difference between one battery over another is almost inconsequential now. battery prices are dropping in the newer chemistries, and they're staying pretty much constant in the older chemistries. I'm going to talk for a minute about battery management systems. Batteries are far more sophisticated than they used to be. They have a lot of electronics included inside of them in many cases, and that helps you keep your batteries running and for you to know exactly what the status is of the batteries. And we're going to talk about some configuration exceptions. It turns out with some of the new chemistries like lithium iron phosphate, you can't necessarily put them into parallel and serial like we used to do with the old lead batteries. Here's about as basic as we can get. So we have a battery in the center. We have a dumb charger down below. Everybody's had one of those when you've had to rejuvenate your battery and get your car started. There's really not a whole lot to it, except there is something very important inside of this battery that a lot of people don't realize, and that there's internal capacitance, and there's also an internal resistance. And that resistor is the thing that kills your battery. And that's why you have to know about what's happening with that. When you're thinking about the battery, think about when I draw a lot of current out of that battery, what happens when I put a lot of current through that resistor? Anybody want to tell me what they think it is? Yeah, it gets hot. Exactly. It can get real hot. Does anybody know what the third law or second law or first law of thermodynamics is? Basically, it boils down to this. Heat is the enemy. So we get batteries that are a little bit smarter. And one of the smartest things that we can get for a battery to keep it going and to make sure that it services us well and we get our money's worth out of it is to get a smart charger. And those smart chargers can come in one of two forms. They can be built into the battery, such as the one that's up here, and those are called battery management systems. Or you can get a dumb battery with a smart charger on the outside that also performs a variety of different functions for you. For instance, it knows exactly what the charge profile needs to look like in order to optimally charge your battery. It has a discharge cutoff so that you don't overcharge your battery. It has short circuit protection so that if you try to weld those two leads together that are coming out of it and start a fire, it'll actually disconnect the battery. You can get balanced charge logic. You can get Bluetooth controls and reports to your phone. You can talk to your battery at night if you really want to, if you want to know how your battery is doing. You know, how's my battery tonight? It's a little bit cold. I should probably go check it. So chemistries. Quality varies by manufacturer, buyer beware. If you're out on Amazon and you're looking for a cheap battery and you find one and you say, wow, that's really too good to be true, the price is really good, my recommendation is go out and check all of the reviews on that battery and find out if it's cheap because it's not good or if it's cheap because there's just an overabundance. I'm not going to talk about lithium ion or lithium polymer because, like I said, I think that those are batteries that are included in finished consumer products. I started a fire and I will never forget it. I do not want you to go through that experience. Lithium batteries do not stop burning. So be careful. We are going to talk a little bit about lead SLAs. Spoiler alert, if you are looking to buy a battery, there isn't any reason, in my opinion, to buy lead acid anymore. It's still viable if you've got some that work. There's no reason to get rid of them. I've got 2 flooded lead acid batteries sitting in my shack, and they run my radios just fine, and they'll probably be there for another 5 years because I take good care of them. Lithium iron phosphate is the new Cinderella in sort of lower cost battery technology. They're super because they have a long life. They will produce a lot of current. They will do very good things for you. They're relatively inexpensive. And like I say, most of them in some way, shape, or form come with some kind of a smart set of electronics inside that protect your battery. Prices are dropping steadily, and they have a very low fire hazard. It's pretty hard to get one of these things hot enough in order to get it to ignite. There's a new kit on the block called lithium titanate, and they're expensive and they are unbelievable, but they're very costly, and I don't think that they have particularly great application for the ham radio space. They might have application for people with RVs. Okay, so here we go into 101. The number one thing that you're going to see when you're going to be thinking about buying a battery is how many amp hours do I need to store? Do I need between recharges? And how many watt hours does that represent? And of course, the formula there is pretty simple. I have a certain number of amp hours. I have a 12-volt battery, so I multiply the amp hours times 12 volts, and that gives me watt hours. In our particular case, almost all the batteries that I would think that we would encounter in this hobby are 12 volt. So I'm just going to stick with that. And then there's the C rate. Does anybody have a real simple definition for C rate? Does anybody know what C rate is? Okay, good. So C rate is... and there's a little bit of confusion even in the literature about this, but a 1C, a battery that is rated at 1C, means that I can fully charge a 10 amp hour battery in 10 hours. Is that correct? Okay, come on, so somebody lied. They do know what it is. No? Okay. If it's 1C, you can definitely charge it in 1 hour. So you can put 10 amps into that battery and get it all fully charged in 1 hour. Would you really want to do that? So you can buy a battery that you can charge a 10 amp hour battery in 1 hour, but why would you want to do that? And the answer is, well, because you only have 1 hour to get it charged. But if you got 10 hours to get it charged, the thing to do is keep the heat down, right, by charging it slower. And of course, you're never really going to get 1C because it's going to heat up and there are going to be inefficiencies. The other common terms that there are have to do with specific power and energy density, and that's pretty much how big does that battery have to be physically in dimensions in order to get a certain amount of watt hours out of it, and how much is it going to weigh. So lithium is really nice because you can get a lot of energy into it and it doesn't weigh much. It also takes up less space than a lead acid battery. Yes, there are a lot of battery terms. Here's another spoiler alert. You don't have to remember all these battery terms. There are only a few that are particularly important in the selection of a battery. Do we really care about what the battery efficiency is? if I lose a couple of watts trying to recharge my battery because it got a little bit warm warmer than another battery. Generally, when I'm recharging my batteries, I'm just plugging a charger into the wall, and it's okay if I use an extra 10 watts of power in order to get my battery charged up. One of the most important considerations for batteries is the state of charge. It's pretty easy to figure out what the state of charge is for a lead acid battery. If you have a voltmeter, how do you figure out what the state of charge is in your battery? How much juice is still left in your battery? Anybody have an answer? What was that? Yeah, and you get a voltage reading and it says, oh yeah, it looks like my battery isn't fully discharged. And you can look at a chart, and if it's a certain voltage, you know how much charge is still left in the battery. With a lithium ion battery or with a lithium iron phosphate battery, it's much more difficult to do that because the voltage at different levels of discharge is almost the same from the beginning of the discharge to the end. So you have to do something else. And generally what that is you measure the amount of power that's coming out of the battery and the amount of power that you put back in when you charge it. And you got a meter that says you got a tank that's half full of gas. And then there's the depth of discharge. And depth of discharge is, well, if you were going to compare a lead acid battery with a lithium iron phosphate battery, I can tell you this. If you buy a lead acid battery and it says that it's got 75 amp hours of charge in it, but I told you that you could only discharge it 30% or 50% and it'll damage your battery, what's the real capacity of your lead acid battery? Yeah. And what's the consequence of discharging it further than that? And yeah, basically, what? Yes, it turns into a doorstop, exactly. Ultimately, what happens is if you discharge it a little bit too far, it doesn't cycle as many times, and so you don't get as many recharges out of it. And so you're ending up with a lead acid battery, discharging it only 30 to 50% of the way. So if I wanted a 75 amp hour battery and I was willing to discharge my battery to 50%, I'd have to buy two 75 amp hour lead acid batteries, and all of a sudden the cost of two lead acid batteries starts looking suspiciously like the cost of a lithium iron phosphate battery, which doesn't heat up as much, which doesn't weigh as much, it doesn't take up as much space. So the cycle life, which is the number of charge cycles to capacity of 80% remaining, what this means is that when you read a spec and it says that the expected lifetime of a battery is 500 recharges, what they're really telling you is it's 500 recharges if you discharge it for lead to 50%, not to dead, but to 50%, and you'll get maybe 800 or 900 recharges. If you discharge it to 80%, you're probably going to get 100 discharges, and I'll show you a chart on that. So here we go. C is the discharge rate divided by the capacity in amp hours. So this chart, the blue line is the Cinderella battery, which is the lithium iron phosphate. And what it says is you're running at about 100% capacity here, and you're discharging it to 80% of discharge, and you're doing that over and over, and what do you get? Well, your battery's basically still brand new. But if you use lead acid batteries, that's not the case. That battery degrades pretty quickly. So here that is in diagrammatic form. So I got a lead acid battery, and it's going to fade. So if my depth of discharge is 30%, which is the blue line, I'm going to get maybe 1,200, call it 1,000 recharges out of that battery. Which means that if I want 75 amp hours of battery and I got a lead acid battery, right, how many, and I want to get 75 hours out of it, and I'm only discharging to 30%, how many batteries, 75 amp hour batteries, do I need to buy? Yeah, 3. Now lithium iron phosphate starting to look even better. Instead of having 3 big boat anchors or door stops, right, I've got a small lithium iron phosphate battery. By the way, the question that I asked myself a few days ago was, if I had to replace my lead acid batteries that are sitting in my shack, what would I do? And it occurred to me that that's really the message of this presentation. I can't imagine why anyone would actually buy a lead acid deep cycle battery anymore in this hobby. Does anybody have a reason that they can think of that we would do that? Well, if you want a 75 amp hour battery with 75 amp hours of delivery and you have to buy 3 lead acid batteries in order to get it, or only 1 lithium iron phosphate battery, you're talking about almost exactly the same amount of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying you've got a lead acid battery and you're wondering if you could draw the same amount of current out of a lithium ion or a lithium iron phosphate battery? The answer is actually you can probably draw more and you'll generate less heat and your battery will last longer. Yes. The lithium iron phosphate chemistry is pretty fantastic. It doesn't get hot when you discharge it at high rates. It doesn't get hot when you recharge it at high rates for the most part, although I've got a couple of recommendations about how to treat these things so that they may outlast you. Not that that's a good thing, but they could outlast us. Lead's about 80 to 85% efficiency. Like I said, we don't really care because we have a wall outlet to generally charge these things up, or maybe a solar panel or two and an MPPT charger. And of course, just for completeness, lead acid batteries come in 2 varieties. They come flooded or sealed, SLAs, and they also are divided into sort of 2 categories. There's a third one in between, which is sort of the hybrid between starter batteries, which are known as high C rate, which means they'll deliver huge amounts of current compared to a lot of other batteries. but they will only do that for a very short period of time, and then it's a short cycle, and we recharge them. That's what's in our cars and our motorcycles and all the other vehicles that we have. And then the deep cycle is basically a lower C rate. They don't deliver quite as much current as quickly, but they have a higher amp hour rating, but they really don't compete with lithium iron phosphate. And if you have batteries and you just don't want to deal with the maintenance of floated batteries, you can buy SLAs, they're AMGs and gels. In our hobby, mostly AGMs are what people would buy. The gels are used for special purposes. The depth of discharge, you can do depth of discharge on these things routinely to about 30 to 50% of its rating, and you might get 500 recharge cycles out of it. Lithium is a completely different story. The depth of discharge, you can safely discharge these things to 80 to 85% of ratings, sometimes even further. But be kind to your battery. My recommendation is never discharge them that far unless there's just an emergency. Buy a battery that's got enough capacity that you don't have to discharge it below 80%. And in fact, if you recharge your batteries, you don't have to charge them up to 100%. Because most of the heat that's generated in a battery happens when it's at low discharge levels and you're trying to get the remaining current out of it, or when you're recharging it and you're trying to get the topped off portion, the resistance goes up and you generate more heat in these batteries. So recharge them to 90% and don't discharge them below 80% and size the battery accordingly. In other words, spend a little extra money and get a little extra space and be kind to your battery and keep the heat down. I already said that ion and polymer are fire hazards. Did I say lithium, ion, and polymer are fire hazards? Okay, so here's my best practices. You can actually, NN6H sent me a sheet of paper the other day, and it was a recommendation about how to figure out how to size a battery, lithium iron phosphate battery. It's a very complicated thing. And I won't go through all the details, but it's sort of, well, what is the duty cycle of my transmitter, and how long am I going to transmit, and am I going to transmit at night, and how long do I need to recharge it? And you can go through this elaborate process in order to get your battery sized just perfectly so that it kind of fits you like a pair of polyester pants from the 70s. Okay? And you can feel really good about that sizing experiment and all the math that you get to do. But you know what? It's really a $60 question. Just buy a slightly bigger battery, buy some looser pants, get a belt, and let them hang in case you need a little extra space in your drawers. Almost guaranteed that after you buy a battery, you're going to say, wow, I really love this battery, and you're going to find more things for it to do. Operate well within maximum specifications, meaning right size. Don't try to fit it perfectly. If you got an extra $60, spend it. It's worth it. You have to protect all of these batteries from extreme cold and heat. So, most of us aren't going to Antarctica and staying there. Even under those circumstances, you can always put a small heater under some of these batteries, but they don't do well below freezing. here's one of my favorite ones. This is the one that I wish that I had incorporated before I welded the two leads together on the lithium ion battery. Use fuses generously. Put the fuses as close to the battery as you can get them, and put them on the other end of the whatever that connection lead is. Fuses are cheap. Yes, they might interfere with your QSO, and you may have to scramble around and see if you can find a piece of bubblegum wrapper that you can stick in there, and short it out. But it's better to have at least to know what that is, and underrate your fuses. If you think that the maximum amount of power that you're going to draw is 100 watts, you know what? Put a fuse in there that will blow at 80 and find out if it ever does. And if it never does, it's probably the right size fuse. The other thing is that I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what battery is going to last the longest? Because I keep getting a question from people that I test batteries for, and they say, how long is my battery going to last? And longer than if you take good care of it, longer than you. If you don't take care of it, probably not very long at all. And so the recommendations in advance is buy slightly large, right? Give yourself some room. Don't charge them too quickly. Don't discharge them too quickly. But the nice thing about lithium iron phosphate is those few times when you really need the power, and you need it quick and you need a lot of energy out fast, these batteries will do the job for you. But if it's the normal routine to run them down to 90% and to do it in an hour, chances are they're not going to last long. No battery is. How am I doing on time? Have I run over? Speed it up? Okay, I speed it up. We're going to do this another time. We'll come back and we'll talk about battery management systems sometime next year. How does that sound?
Yep. We have a lot of batteries out there that have internal battery management systems. I can't think of the name of the one. Battleborn. So my question is, the battery itself may become useless in a short period of time because the internal BMS fails. So my question is, how reliable are the BMSs? And should you go with an external BMS system and use just individual cells?
Yeah, you know what? That's actually one of the slides. Oh, sorry. That was on one of the next. I believe in modularity. The nice thing about Battleborn is they seem to be a very reputable company, and if that BMS fails, you're probably going to get a replacement, but you can't get inside of the case of a Battleborn battery. I don't like batteries that have internal battery management systems. I think it's worth the money to buy a battery management system and buy individual cells. I mean, that's what I'm going to do when I claim that my floated lead acid batteries are done, even though they're probably still perfect. I'm not gonna buy a battery with an internal battery management system. I don't think that I brought any. I didn't bring any. I did bring, if you want to look at it, there's a little DRO right here, which is great for anybody who hooks their repeater up inside, or their crossband repeater up inside their truck or whatever. These little things will cut the supply to the battery and to the between the battery and the radio, so that when you get back to your Jeep, you've got enough starter power that you can start your thing. So, they're like $5. There are battery management systems that are $30. You can spend anywhere from $30 to $500 for a battery management system And it just depends upon what you want. Outside is better. Anything else?
What's a good float voltage for lead acid versus AGM versus lithium polymer? And if you, and I think you already partially answered this question, but if you were going to build from scratch in your shack a configuration to DC power your rig, and your shack was in a home and it shares a wall with your kids' room, for example, from a safety perspective, what would you recommend?
Lithium iron phosphate is really safe, so I don't think there's any real issues there. And when it comes to float voltages, there's not a simple answer to that because different manufacturers have slightly different chemistries in lead acid batteries. And so that float charge varies. And get a real smart charger. That's what I say. NN6H.
Yes. Anyway, good talk. But you mentioned about doing your own batteries and not actually using the battery management that comes with them. Most of the systems have their own, battery management. So would you actually do individual cells and configure what you want for capacity and voltage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some really spanking deals on individual cells in lithium iron phosphate, and we have this beautiful thing called YouTube, and you go there and you say, actually the place to go to get this kind of information is the solar enthusiasts. So people that are hooking up solar and putting battery backup in place have the answers pretty much to all of these questions. And you can buy really good grade A cells and build your own.
Okay, hang on. Yeah, you said not to discharge lower than 80%, to lower than 80%. If the voltage is constant, how do you tell when you're getting there?
That's a great question. The answer is, so there are devices in the slides that I didn't show you, which are state of charge devices. What they do is they monitor the charge going into the battery, and then you tell it you basically tell this device, my battery is fully charged. You tell that device, it's an electronic device, this is a 12 volt lithium iron phosphate battery, 75 amp hour rated, and it will integrate the power going out when it discharges, and when you recharge it back through that device, and it knows when it's full. And some of them you can tell them, I only want you to charge to 90% or 80% or whatever that number is. It's really slick. And they'll even taper off at the charge rate near the end, and your battery will outlast you. Any other questions? Yep.
Has the technology gotten to the point for car batteries yet, or are we still lead acid for cars?
I really don't know I don't know the answer.
If you don't mind me answering that.
Please do.
I had the opportunity at SEMA, which is a big car convention in Las Vegas. I had a chance to talk to anti-gravity batteries. So if you ever look that up on the internet, they're an outstanding lithium-ion producer. They do make a battery now for heavy discharge for starting applications. So the answer is yes, they do.
Yeah, and if you really need a lot of power, you can put lithium iron phosphate batteries pretty much in parallel. It's serial that's really the biggest issue. But you put them in parallel and you can draw a massive amount of current.